Triangulated biomorphic forms, armed to the teeth, charge across the canvas at some unseen enemy in this painting. Strange figures painted in hues of off-white and pale, pinkish flesh tones have bodies comprised of severe geometric shapes with sharp angles, some with layers of curvilinear trapezoidal shapes, with legs and feet composed of triangles. Only one figure in the foreground has a foot approximating a human foot with toes and toenails, although cartoonish at best. The figures have eyes that jut out from the body at the end of tube-like protrusions or appendages, and almost seem to be straining or bulging forward with their own ferocity at the presumed enemy off campus. Again, the figure in the foreground is afforded more detail and has red eyes, perhaps bloodshot, consumed by rage or reflecting a hunger for blood. A shock of black hair, indicated by layered black triangles, sticks out from the top of each figure's head. These figures each carry a long, black, cylindrical shape, unmistakably some type of cannon or gun, although one figure in the middle appears to be carrying a cannon shell or large bullet, indicating a collective effort in battle. The ground they charge across is blood red, and the sky is almost entirely black, except for ambiguous blue triangles, which could perhaps be clouds, birds, or planes. They seem to reflect and balance out the coordinated, frenetic effort of the figures on the ground. This painting is entitled Penggong Yeongwon, Anti-Communist Female Souls, and it was created by South Korean artist and art critic Yeongwon in 1952, 1 year before the end of the Korean War, which had devastated the people of Korea for some 2 years at this point. The elements in the painting, including war as a theme, Cubist style, and the limited use of color, seem to reference Pablo Picasso's Guernica, painted in 1937 and shown here on the left. By all accounts, Yeongwon was aware of and appreciated Picasso's Guernica anti-war painting, which was created in response to the bombing of the town of Guernica by German and Italian warplanes that same year. Yeongwon's painting depicts female spirits against communism, as the title would suggest, but beyond that, it seems to ultimately present the artist's psychological state and feelings about the horrors of war in the conveying of this surrealistic geometric atmosphere. Yeongwon was born in Seoul, Korea in 1921, and like many well-known Korean artists at the time that we've already discussed, would go on to study art in Japan at the Imperial Art Institute, starting in 1943. It was here that he studied Impressionism, Neo-Impressionism, Fauvism, and Cubism. After Yeongwon returned home to Korea from his studies in Japan, he participated in an exhibition that was a part of the Liberation Celebration in 1945, when Japan surrendered to the Allies, ending 35 years of Japanese colonial rule over Korea. And he was later given his first solo exhibition in 1949. And just as a starting point, this oil painting by Yeongwon entitled Mother and Child was painted in 1945 and is certainly a far cry from the geometric abstraction and kinetic energy of his Penggong Yeongwon, Anti-Communist Female Souls painting that he did in 1952. This painting shows Yeongwon working within his early influences, specifically Fauvism, with his use of color to distinguish space, and his emotional interpretation of human figures. But rather than simply recreating the Cubist and Surrealist styles and other styles as imported from the West, Yeongwon instead wanted to develop and grow a modern art canon that was built upon and integrated traditional Korean art and culture. To this end, Yeongwon and several of his contemporaries that included artists and architects founded the Sinjo Yeongpa Collective, or the Neoplasticism Group, in December of 1956. They are pictured here during their first exhibition. Throughout the 1950s, Yeongwon would go on to create works that explored geometric abstractionism in the form of Cubism and Surrealism, like we've seen with his earlier Penggong Yeongwon Anti-Communist Female Souls painting. Here is a leaflet from the first Sinjo Yeongpa exhibition in 1957. The kinetic use of triangular shapes in this design is similar to Penggong Yeongwon Anti-Communist Female Souls, first articulated by Piet Mondrian in the journal De Style, The Style. Neoplasticism, or the new plastic art, was a response to the devastation created by World War One and offered a way to achieve a visual harmony in art that could provide a blueprint for restoring order and balance back to everyday life. Neoplasticism was essentially an artistic philosophy that called for the renunciation of naturalistic representation in favor of a stripped down formal vocabulary, principally consisting of straight lines, rectangular planes, primary colors. The Sinjo Yongpa group hoped to emulate the spirit of the Bauhaus movement, but was committed to the creative investigation of modern art by inheriting the traditional art of Korea. The adoption of such an artistic philosophy, but adapted to the needs and goals of Korean artists, does make sense, especially in light of the recent devastation of the Korean War, which would have been experienced by all of them firsthand. Throughout the 1950s, Byung Yeongwon would go on to create works that explored geometric abstractionism in the form of cubism and surrealism, like we've seen earlier with his Pengon Yohan anti-communist female souls painting. The 1956 painting Heaven and Earth, shown here on the left, is an example of Byung Yeongwon's experimentation with linear composition, with simplified geometric forms and shapes, such as dots, lines, and planes. On the right, there's a painting called Seoul Station Neighborhood, painted 1 year later, in 1957. And in this painting, we can see simplifications of geometric images, which is sort of characteristic of neoplasticism, with lots of dynamic lines moving across the canvas in juxtaposing directions, forming various shapes with their space filled with a range of soft pastel colors and darker reds and black hues. As Byung Yeongwon continued to explore his neoplastic approach, he moved away from the frenzied linear compositions to even more abstract configurations of circular and dotty compositions, such as his 1959 oil painting Spirit of Avant-Garde. In the same year, the Sinjo Yongpa group disbanded after their third and final exhibition at the Korean Information Service Gallery, although they managed to hold 3 exhibitions while active during their time. During the 1960s, Byung Yeongwon began to explore the essence of art through his own theory of united existence modeling, which was inspired in part by his study of science and psychology and other kinds of emerging technologies at the time. And particularly at this time, the world was at the dawn of the space age in the early 60s. And artists like Byung Yeongwon were attempting to connect the rapid emergence of technology and science into modern life with contemporary art. Byung Yeongwon had predicted that by the second half of the 20th century, Korean society would enter a quote unquote hyper scientific era, or an atomic age, marked by great, profound scientific and technological advancements. Just as all matter is made up of atoms, Byung Yeongwon believed that all objects in the world could be reduced to simple lines and colors. This is why he deemed abstract art as a very fit mode of artistic representation for depicting the atomic age to come. In his theory of united existence modeling, which was his own personal theory of art he was developing at this time, he began to sort of develop or posit ideas regarding the coexistence of shapes and figures. And that's exemplified by this painting, United Existence 97 Perfume, which was painted in 1969, which became a catalyst for him to generate a series of abstract paintings using plain dots and lines. This painting here, called United Existence, painted in 1969, evokes the feeling of looking through a microscope at a colony of cells or tiny bubbles, perhaps like a chemical reaction in progress. Or you could view this as you were looking through a telescope at a collection of planets or distant galaxies. We are sort of presented with a whole varied array of different sized circular shapes with alternating pastel hues. It's just this continued experimentation with shapes as a way to sort of represent this time period, really in Korea, with all this emerging technology and his sort of vision of it. And here again, we see 2 more paintings from the mid 60s, where Byung Yeongwon he's continuing to deal with the circular, almost cellular motif. I mean, these almost literally look like cells with nuclei and different components of a cell. Arranging them in configurations of 2 and 3. There's like circles within circles, And again, it just strikes me that this is sort of what you would see, looking through a microscope, or what you might envision at this time period when people were talking about, the atomic sort of exploration, the atomic level of exploration of the world around us, which was, fairly new at this time, still in the 1960s. And towards the end of the 1960s and into the 1970s, we see Yeongwon producing increasingly abstracted arrangements of circles. Still kind of evoking the sort of sense of like biological cells or particles at the atomic level. But yeah, he just continues to iterate on this sort of vision of geometric abstractionism kind of meets emerging technology, sort of trying to grapple with the two and find a way to express this new world that we're living in. And these are three paintings kind of from this series of the title unknown. Starting in the one on the left, 1969. This goes all the way till 1975, where he was doing paintings kind of in this milieu. So at some point in the early 1980s, Beyond Yeongwon seems to have pivoted back, at least in some part, to some sort of surrealist painting style with traces of some recognizable, quote unquote, real world images incorporated into it. Although we can clearly see, in paintings such as United Universe, which was painted in 1984, here on the left, that it seems to me that he's sort of still carried his geometric abstraction extractionism, carried it forth into his return to surrealist work. He's very much exploring kind of a geometric landscape with a very well defined kind of vanishing point and horizon line. Yet it looks sort of futuristic. He's got kind of his sort of circular, cellular, or atomic kind of circles, spheres in the middle, and then something kind of at the top of this painting, which kind of looks like a swirling universe, is definitely an indication of things to come as he develops towards the end of his life, kind of a series of paintings that we'll see coming up here that deal with the cosmos. So sort of like the painting on again, sort of the painting on the left, United Universe. It is some kind of urban scene, but it's definitely a long way from 1957's Seoul Station neighborhood painting that we saw earlier. Instead of geometric abstractionism intending to kind of represent an urban location, this urban location or landscape is surrealistic and sort of futuristic at the same time. Um, but the contemplation of the origins of life itself, God and the universe, which ultimately kind of seems to be where science and technology take us in the end anyway, sort of a logical conclusion to the exploration of life itself. Seemed to be very much on Beyond Youngwon's mind in the last few years of his life. He was going to, die in 1988. But he was kind of moving away from the technological, futuristic inspired works of the 60s and 70s into and moving into this kind of almost cosmological sort of landscape and themes in the 1980s. So this series of paintings here, um, title unknown 17, The Energy of God's Creation, which is painted in 1985. Middle one, United Universe of God, painted in 1987, and The United Universe of God, painted in 1988, the last year of his life. I mean, these almost look like painterly precursors to the images that we would see of the Hubble telescope, depicting swirling collections of galaxies and stars. And it's almost as if Byeon Young-won is using the canvas to sort of escape this earthly plane and go to another celestial realm entirely. But he's still kind of using the language of abstract shapes that he's been developing for the last several decades. So I just wanted to sort of juxtapose uh, Pangon Johan, Anti-Communist Female Souls, painted in 1952, with his last known or close to his last known painting, United Universe of God, painted in 1988. So some 30 years earlier, Beyond Youngwon had used his experimentations with geometric abstractionism and surrealism to express the horrors and traumas of war. And it's arguable that he pivoted towards neoplasticism as a response to the devastating destruction of the Korean War, much as Modrian and his colleagues sort of developed neoplasticism as a response to World War One. A need to kind of order the world and make sense of the world after such horrible chaos. But throughout his career, he would continue to explore the idea of using visual harmony as a way to provide a blueprint for restoring order and balance to everyday life, whether that be war, the space age, technology, or the cosmos itself. And I think that towards the end of his life, he was now using his own theories of art and geometric abstractionism to explore the infinite potential of the cosmos and universe and existence itself.